Welcome back. My name is Jack Burgess. This time I want to talk about a different subject. I had a model railroad email me a month ago, and he mentioned that he's starting to have problems with his hands because of a particular disease, and so that's affecting his modeling. And he suggested that maybe I could do one on ways to still stay in the hobby and build models if you're starting to have problems because of old age. Also, the same things I'm going to talk about can help you build better models, more accurate models. So I'm looking at both sides, better, more accurate models for people that are doing fine and ways to help people that are having problems. A lot of these are something you might call a third hand. If you've got one tool in one hand and the model in the other and your hands are not working like they used to, it's hard to do something correctly. If you have a third hand to hold the model down and so forth, then that might help. So I'm going to start with a project I'm working on right now, which is this. It's not a YV model, a Yosemite Valley Railroad model. This is a kit from the 70s that a longtime friend of mine who is not a model railroader bought because he's into stereo photography, and this was a passenger car used back in the 1880s to haul photographers around the West taking stereo photographs. So if you paid attention to some of my previous models, I saved the frame. Few photos, I've thought that the sides of the kit were too short, so I've made new sides, 3D printed the windows and the doors, so forth. So I'm nearly finished. One of the things I've got to do is finish the roof. And I have never done a passenger car roof. So I wrote to a longtime friend, Tony Custer, and asked him for some ideas. He forwarded my email on to three other models, two of them I knew, one I knew of, but I'd never met. And they suggested using tissue paper, painting this top and so forth, and applying the tissue paper. So the first thing I did was to take a piece of wood and practice, see if it's going to work for me, and it looks like it will. So what I have to do now is cut a bunch of strips of tissue paper and apply them to the roof, and then paint it and so forth. So here's the approach I'm going to use on this. I have a cutting board here. This is a drafting triangle. I have several of these because I use them a lot. This one, they're still available, even though most people don't draw manually. When I went to work for the city of Newark, where I live, back in 1965, the first thing I was doing was drafting. Another engineer would mark up a plan, and then I would use ink on Mylar and draw everything. So I've been using these for 40 or 50 years. I really like this one. This is about an $18 triangle, but you can get by on smaller ones. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the tissue paper, put it right here, put this on top of it, and then take this. This is a scuba diving weight, and they're still available. You can buy them. I did not buy this one. My wife and I started scuba diving maybe 20 years ago or more, and we always go out on a boat, charter boat. That means when you get on the boat, they take your gear, they set it all up for you, they'll put the weights in it, everything. And then they take it all apart and wash it when you're done. After one trip, I got home and I discovered this had been forgotten and left in my BC. So I saved it, not thinking what I might do or might use it, but it's kind of like a third hand. I don't have to hold this down now. All I have to do is cut. So what I will do is take a knife, and you can even use these lines and line that up. Now you know your square. Come up to the next one. That one didn't cut off very well. And so forth. This is a scalpel. And one of the very first presentations I did, I was going through all my tools and I picked this up and I said, this is a scalpel, but I don't use it very much. I should throw it away. I have really gotten used to it. The blade is thinner than an X-Acto knife, and it's very lightweight, and so it's very easy to use. So that's all you do. So here's another trick. This is a resin kit that I'm working on. I stopped working on it months ago. I don't know why. It was coming out fine. I just got onto some other projects. But I'm using it to show what I actually do on these. And I've made these little supports, I guess you'd call. The base is O-scale 6x14s. This is about 2 or 3 inches long, longer than the car is wide. Put a little post on it, and then I drill a hole in it, and this then screws in. So you have 2 of them, and I'll show you in a minute what the advantage of this. So now we just turn this over, and you've got a nice solid platform to work on the roof, so forth. I've taken that a little step further. As shown in this photo, I've taken a piece of 1/8" plywood, about 5 inches square, put a couple pieces of 3/8 balsa wood supports on the end, and now you can take this box car, put it on its side, and it's off of the table and support at the back and 3 points. So that lets you work on the sides without holding it down. Here's another thing I did along the same line. I took another piece of plywood, glued a couple of the same supports that you saw earlier. You can see one's toward the end, one's up a little bit. Holes go all the way through the plywood. Now with that car attached to that piece of plywood, and put in a vise, tighten the vise, put a little spacer under the vise, and you can now work on the ends of the car. You can add the grab irons, so forth, all the details you need on the end. Take it off and flip it around and set it up again. You can do the other end. After you've painted it, put it back on this base, and you can do the decals. So again, a third hand, you're not using your hands for anything except what you're working on. And if you needed to, you could even use a second hand to hold one hand. One thought I had at this point is you could take this whole idea one step further and make a support for your hand, so your hand is up in the air and working on the end of the car. I've drawn a little sketch of what I was thinking of. Simply a piece of 3-inch PVC, put something on the end of it and a support, and then you can rest your hand up there right with the car, so you're kind of working like this. Pursuing this idea even further, several years ago I drew this up in 3D and had it printed in a fairly cheap material. But what this does, now you can work on the top, now you can work on the bottom. I sell these through Shapeways, but they're kind of expensive. They're about $25 a pair with no profit in them, but they work really well. So I've made, I'm going to say hundreds, I think that's an exaggeration, but at least 100 jigs in the 40 years I've been modeling. I have a box labeled Jigs. I pulled it down before I started thinking about what to do on this video. I have no idea what some of those things in that box were for. So I threw them away because it doesn't do me any good if I'm saving something that I don't know how to use. But this was in there. And at first, I couldn't remember what I used it for. But I was going through photos and so forth and found this photo, and it shows a flat car in the jig. So I was building a bunch of these at one time. So here's what it does. You can see this is a wedge. If you pull it this way, it's going to get tighter. This way, it's going to get looser. So this was a 3D printed frame for a flat car. I needed to add the side sills and the end sills and have everything parallel. So this one slides in. This one slides in. Move the wedge down. And then once everything is nice and tight together, put the sides and then glue it in place. I think it was easier to use when I did it the first time. Maybe I'm getting too old, but that worked out really well. And I've used this wedge idea other times. It's an easy way to push things together and keep them all parallel and so forth. So here's one of those flat cars. I mentioned it's a 3D frame. The frame includes all the brake gear and piping. So basically all you're doing is adding the side sills, coupler pockets and so forth. And you have a flat car. So here's another trick I use a lot. Say you want to have some pieces of wood and have them all exactly the same length. What I will do is take them, cut them over length, over size, put a piece of painter's tape on the back and make sure it's a little bit shorter than what you want. And then use my disc sander to sand down one end, flip them over, and sand down the other end until you get your marks, and then they'll be all exactly the same length. So I used the same idea in building some wood trestles on my layout. I have 11 wood trestles on the layout, all scratch built. So what I did is I made a jig to hold these pieces of wood and sand them all the same length. That jig was for HO. When I finished all my bridges, I threw it away. A few years ago, I was going to make an O-scale bridge, and so I made a new jig just for that. So this photo shows the idea of that jig. Is you have some pieces of styrene, two of them, it's going to be 4 pieces of wood, so 2 of them go in on the right hand side, 2 of them go in on the left hand side. The pusher, which is shown in blue, is used to push the pieces of wood into the disc sander and sand all of one end, 2 of them on angles, 2 of them square. You flip them over, do the same thing, and then you push them as far as you need to make the right length. So here's a picture of that O-scale jig clamped to the table on my disc sander. I'm using a triangle to push the wood into it. Here I am pushing a piece of wood in on the angled side to get the angle correct. I'll do that for 2 pieces. And then, as shown in this photo, I'm now pushing them all 4 into the disc so they're all going to be the same length. So here is another jig built to actually build the bents themselves. So this way they're all spaced correctly. And what I would do is put glue on the tops of the 4 bents, push them up against the top stringer, do the same thing on the bottom, and then if you look closely, there's a wedge down there, the same wedge idea I had before, and I push that in, and that makes all the joints tight. Partly I did this because I've had to build 2 of these supports, and I wasn't sure if I had all the stuff exactly the same height, and so there might be a little variation from one to the other, which is fine. So here's the bridge itself. I think I have them the same length because it's sitting correct, but that was how it was done. So here's a support I built to help me when I was adding DCC to my locomotives. This looks like it's custom for this engine, but I have 5 engines that have exactly the same frames and everything, so it works. What I also wanted to do is add wipers to these drivers so that I was not relying completely on the tender wheels to provide power to the decoder. So this has worked out really well. So now I'm going to talk about some jigs that I use when I'm airbrushing models, which could be also used when you're painting them. So the first one is to be able to hold a truck while you're painting it. So this little holder has a 256 screw on one end, a 348 screw on the other. That are the 2 screws that are used for holding the trucks. Just unscrew that, took it in there, and you've got a holder. Then when it comes to wheel sets, I built this a long time ago. It's kind of complicated. I actually wrote an article on it. But what I wanted to do was paint the wheels and not get the treads painted. So this just drops in here like this. So this holds the wheel so that you can paint the wheels themselves, but not the bearings. So everything gets painted except the bearings and the treads. So this works out really well. When you're done, just pull it out, do the next one. So I use this. This is available from somewhere I bought it. It's commercial. And you can see I've used it a lot. But I add one more thing to it. Say if I'm going to paint a boxcar, I can adjust this. I've got little adapters that drop in here. And I've got two sets of these. Again, one for the 256, one for the 348. And lock one in place, slide this back and forth until the model drops on it. Lock this, and then you can spray the whole thing and never touch it. So this is pretty simple. This is a piece of plastic with a channel. You can get that at the hardware store. Nut that goes right down in the center of it. This is also a special nut by itself, and then on the top is just a piece of, I don't know, styrene or metal or something that would hold the screw. So, and some of these jigs get evolved. You know, I might have a jig that works pretty good, and I use it, and I'm saying, man, if I just did this, either modify it or build another one. It works out. So I have one last one that was in my box of jigs. This is it. I have no idea what I built this for. I did a really good job. Look, it's got all brass screws. Ends are cut off. I don't have a clue. Into the trash. So in conclusion, I want to mention a couple of points. First, I do a lot of jigs, and it may seem like they take a long time, but say I've got a bunch of flat cars, 9 flat cars to build. That jig might have taken me 20 minutes to build, but if it saves 15 minutes during the assembly, you've saved an hour or more for the whole entire process. So that's one element, is saving time. The other is probably even more important, and that's accuracy. Building jigs so that your things are square, like the flat car again, where the end sills and the side sills and everything are square, and you know that before you start adding glue to it. Another jig like the one for the trestle, to both make the parts and assemble them, is to produce a model that I'm satisfied with, that is as good as it can be for me. I'm only building models for myself, so that is important to me. So with that, hope to see you next time.